about them Irish?
I can't take it anymore. I need a national championship.
This is the Four Horsemen Podcast.
1,791 days. That's how long it's been since USC has beaten Notre Dame as of this Saturday. It's rivalry week. I'm Dylan, joined by Steve. We also got two special guests with us this week, USC fans. But before we get into that, I'm going to pass it over to Steve to get a word from our sponsor.
There are currently over 9 million unemployed Americans, and there are over 10 million job openings, one of them including the USC head coach. How are you? So now is the time for everyone to step your game up and find a job that's going to work for you. And that's where we introduce Dwindle. Dwindle is the first job board aimed at helping to solve the student loan debt crisis. Job seekers can sign up for free and get a free resume critique, and then you can start applying for jobs that provide student loan repayment benefits. If you don't have any student loans yet, but you're looking for an affordable education, Dwindle has your back. They are going to be able to connect you with jobs that provide tuition assistance and even tuition reimbursement. Check them out today at dwindlestudentdebt.com. That's DWINDLE studentdebt.com. Let them know the Four Horsemen sent you.
Awesome. Listeners, you guys remember Brian from last year in our Analytics Royal Rumble at USC Analytics on Twitter. He's with us today. Brian, how are you?
Good. How are you guys?
Pretty good. I mean, it's been a rough season kind of for everybody. So this is a mental health check for my USC friends. Also joined with us for the first time, Buck from @BuckMetrics, I think, on Twitter. Buck, you're new to the show, so why don't you just give everyone a little rundown of who you are and how you got into SC?
Yeah, I graduated in 1992 from USC, so I've seen a lot of the best, a lot of the worst, a whole lot of the in between. I'm a CPA, got an accounting degree. I kind of screw around with math. If you follow my account on Twitter, you'll see I push out different little metrics that I have, primarily for recreational use of, financial interest in certain Saturday events with varying degrees of success. Let's please not talk about yesterday. And if you know my bookie, tell him I'm sorry. Let's just say that.
Oh, that's awesome. We wanted both of you on here because we didn't want to outnumber you and to bully you like we did with Vegas last year, the Alabama fan for the title game or the playoff game. So we got both of you here so you can fully speak your mind and give us that full Trojan fight on propaganda of your own. We're pretty excited about that. I will say, I'm going to be in the minority here, but the tribute to Troy, the dun da 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 da, is like the best marching band thing in college football.
If you're looking for somebody to disagree with you, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to disappoint you there.
Okay.
I haven't gone to any games this year, but apparently they stopped doing they had the band stopped doing that for a while.
That's the only song you would play for most games, so I could.
Yeah, it's the one thing that drives other teams nuts. And apparently they brought in this DJ that does kooky, wacky little things for the kids from the basketball games, and apparently it wasn't that well received. So I think I heard
that whole thing's been a long time coming.
Yeah,
because we had our band director retired after like 200 years, and so like the people running the games have been like chomping at the bit for like a decade to get their hands on it and do whatever they want. And because he used to just play whenever he felt like it, and so now they've got the DJ and you can hear them playing more of whatever, just songs over the loudspeakers instead of the band.
And do you like the song though, Brian, or is it that kind of like when a band's popular and all their legit fans hate it because that's their one song that's really popular?
Oh no, I mean I love it, and I feel like that's like the point where USC is at the top is you don't have to look at the record or stuff. It's just when the fans opponent fans just go berserk having to hear the song over and over. That's when you're back or you're on top.
And it pisses Notre Dame fans off. And I think what Coach Kelly does is he actually plays that at practice all day for USC week to get everybody sick of it. But I've always kind of liked it. And there's like a funny like YouTube like video where it's 9 hours straight of that song. And I've listened to a bit of that a little too much. It's just on repeat for 9 hours because I dig it. I think it sounds pretty cool and pretty very Colosseum-y, very ancient Rome. It's got something cool to it. Steve, you if I recall correctly, because we had debated who we hated more on the show before, SC or Michigan. You hate SC a little more, right? Because of the Bush push and stuff.
That's correct. Yeah. So.
And so what do you think of the song?
it's quickly surpassing that Michigan is much more hated at this point. So I'm flip flopping. But yeah, no, I like the song. I dig it. Like you said, it kind of has like that classical feel to it. Like I was actually just watching Gladiator the other night, so it kind of had that sort of feeling. So it's cool. I generally actually like when USC is a pretty good program. Just makes those games more exciting, but also I hope that they lose every single game against Notre Dame, obviously. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
As long as we're doing guilty confessions of Notre Dame fans, when I watch the movie Troy, I always cheer for the Trojans. I always get upset when like the Trojan horse comes and they sack the city, because I don't know, I kind of dig that mythical city that may have existed. I'm not the biggest historian, but so you know what? Let's get into the show. It's enough of the Notre Dame fans speaking. Let's hear the guests. So we just want to talk about USC, because right now there's obviously a bit of a disaster going on. And Buck, you've been pretty hard on them, I think, for as long as I've known you. And I think with justification. So do you want to kind of share your thoughts here on anything related to the program and what's bothering you these days?
Yeah, I kind of like to take a step back, draw the lens back a little bit, and just focus on the university as a whole. You've got just an amazing era of, I'd just say, corruption and ineptitude. You've got the university was a huge player in the admission scandal. You had, I don't know how much this news goes nationwide, but we had a medical dean that was let go for smoking crack in his office with prostitutes. Yeah, and the real scandal was the cover up too. They tried to make it go away. I don't know if y'all had heard about the doctor in the student medical office that was molesting female students. Has this made it out there? Okay, great. So we've kind of put a wall around some of the bad news. Most recently, just this week, a story broke about some bribery between the dean of, I think, the School of Social Work or something like that, and an LA City Councilman exchanging like a professorship for donations or funding. It's too much. And then drilling in a little closer to the football team, you've got Pat Hayden was asked to leave a couple years ago because of some weird stuff involving, paying family members in a charity. And so if you just take all this dysfunction, you kind of drill down to what does it mean to the football program? This is just unbelievable. So in 2023, when, next USC coach, whoever he is, visits South Bend, that will be over the 8 trips to South Bend. That will be the 6th man to coach USC in that spot. Not only that doesn't even count Sark, because he just couldn't hang in there and make it to South Bend. Moreover, this upcoming Saturday, Dante Williams will be the 3rd interim coach in USC's last 5 trips to South Bend. How is that even possible? You couldn't like do that if you tried. So yeah, I've been a little hard on him, but I think for pretty good reason.
Yeah, no kidding. And that stat still blows my mind, and it's true. Like, last 5 times you've been here, you've had 3 interim head coaches, which I'm sure has contributed to Notre Dame's recent success in that game.
Oh, absolutely.
Brian, are you feeling kind of similar to Buck, or do you have something else?
Yeah. One thing to add to what he was saying is, if you go back a year or two, USC potentially could have gotten a new coach and paid a lot of money for, say, someone like Urban Meyer. And it's easy to argue why that would be worth it, but they didn't want to do it because they had all this scandal, all that money from the lawsuits to pay out. They're like, that's going to be a terrible look for us to spend all this money to buy out our coaching staff and then get a new one while we have all this to deal with. So that's an actual direct tie-in to all those scandals negatively affecting the football program.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there, and I think Notre Dame fans may be begrudging to admit, but USC is very attractive, and I've been saying this a lot in group chats and stuff. USC is historical beyond what people I think understand. Like they've won championships in almost every decade. They are up there with Heisman's, up there with draft picks, up there with Hall of Famers, just as much as Notre Dame. So they've got that history thing that makes Notre Dame attractive. But on top of that, you're in Southern Cal. You got the nice weather. You don't have to deal with, let's say, certain academic and religious bystanders that Notre Dame students have to, right? USC is way more attractive, I think, for athletes. And you're in the hotbed of recruits in California. I will be the first one to admit this. If I wasn't a Notre Dame fan, I'd be looking really hard at USC if I was a blue chip prospect, because it's got everything, right? And, the Coliseum, Brian, you actually got that as your background. It's a shame that I don't think USC fans have been living up to their potential, because that Coliseum is a really fun place to go. I've looked at going myself a few times. It's historic. It's got, it's the grand old lady, right? USC's got so much to it. So why aren't you guys better? And Buck, I'll let you take that one.
I don't know. I just kind of think 6 different coaches over 8 visits to South Bend doesn't really lend itself to any kind of identity. You've got this nonsense about trying to recreate the Pete Carroll magic, which I can understand hiring Lane Kiffin. That's kind of the mistake every program makes after they have a huge run like that. They try to just extend it, and that's fine. To me, the original sin was hiring Sark. If you kind of put on your game theory for idiots hat and you say, what does the other side want to happen? Every Washington fan I knew was delighted that Sark was gone. So it was, a true plus minus, plus in Seattle, minus in Los Angeles. And then obviously hiring Helton was just a joke. And I don't even understand when you kind of get to the lazy national narratives about, USC is just trying to extend the Pete Carroll magic. Well, somebody needs to draw me a line from Pete Carroll to Clay Helton, because it's not a straight line, and I really don't see the path there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Brian, I remember we talked about Clay Helton a bit last year. I don't know if you were super hard on him or if you were a little sympathetic to the garbage he had to deal with, but where do you kind of stand on all that?
On Helton? I mean, I think at that point and still at this point, it's kind of like probably 2017, you kind of could put 2 and 2 together. And you're like, this is what we're dealing with. So it kind of got to the point where it's like, I'm not going to over the top bag on him because I know what it is. I know I'm not going to expect something out of him in the program that I don't think is possible. But I think one of the things, going back to your question to Buck, is like Matt Corral is a great microcosm of all the issues, because he's someone who was committed to USC. He's got like top of the draft, like physical abilities, but they kind of split up with him in the recruiting process because he had some character issues, and they went with JT Daniels. And the thing is, like, when you talk about Clay Helton and the program and the culture, like, you can't take a guy like Matt Corral who in high school, which is normal to have some character issues, and put him into Clay Helton's program and expect great results. Well, meanwhile, we've seen with Lane Kiffin, now everyone's talking about how mature character Matt Corral is. He's one of the top, Heisman candidates. He's going to be top of the draft. Like, you couldn't take those guys and put them into Clay Helton's program. Like, you knew that those guys just aren't going to work out. And with a lot of elite programs, like, you take a lot of good character guys and you take some question marks and you get the best out of them, because that's how strong the culture is. And that's not what it was like at USC. I mean, because Dante Williams, his first week of all his interviews, the main thing he was hammering away at is, we're going to be accountable now. We're going to have accountability. And that's great to hear as a fan or alum, but like, that's a sign of what, like, someone who was inside the program knew was a big issue and was just kind of waiting to get his hands on it and do something about it.
Right. So before I ask you guys about who you want to be the replacement and who are the targets, for the Notre Dame listeners, I got to bring Steve into it for a second because he'll feed the propaganda machine. Steve, what's going wrong in Southern Cal in your opinion?
I'm looking and I'm seeing a complete breakdown right now in the recruiting over the last couple of years. So 2016 they were 10th, 2017 and 2018 back-to-back years they were 4th in the nation in their in their recruiting. So this team currently has a lot of very highly talented juniors and seniors. But then last year, the 2020 class, they finished 64th.
Holy.
Yeah, in 2019 they finished 20th, and then the 2021 class they did jump back up into the mix of things, and they're back at 7th. But I mean that's 2 years of where they just one did not get a lot of recruits. Like I think I saw like 12 signings or something like that, and then also there is precipitous drop off to not even within the top 50. And although those would be younger guys on the roster, I mean, that's going to have reverberating effects, in my opinion. And I think a lot of that also, the lapse in that has to do with the coach carousel that both our guests had mentioned. So I think it all starts with recruiting, all starts with coaching. And I think that's just kind of bleeding down to the field.
I have an alternative theory why Southern Cal's been so mediocre, and not even bad, just mediocre. And I believe that Matt Leinart sold his soul on 4th and 1 or whatever, and the deal there with the Devil was like 20 years of mediocre football, and that was granted. So that's what I like to think. Okay, let's get into the coaching stuff because I find that super interesting because USC should be the top job available on the market. I mean, we like to think Notre Dame would be should Kelly opens up, but at the time and at the moment, it's got to be USC. There's so much potential there. You've got the recruiting hotbed of California. You have a pretty easy conference, to be honest. Looking at Oregon right now, struggling to get through their schedule. You got to be basically, licking your lips, getting ready for that looking at that USC job. So Buck, I know there's a guy you like in particular. Do you want to kind of give the audience who that is and why you like him so much?
Yeah. And, just for reference, in 2015, when we hired Helton, I actually was homing for Matt Campbell when he was at Toledo, since he was clearly the magic there. This time around, just as I learn a little more, I really, really, really like what James Franklin could do there. He's a recruiter, and if you kind of just go back to my game theory for idiots approach, if you listen to people that really are connected to coaches across the country, the rest of the Pac-12 does not want James Franklin at USC because he's got the personality, and now you got the NIL pull, and just he looks like he could pull in Pete Carroll level of classes. He's got that dynamic personality. He's likable. And if you look at Penn State too, his players love him. You can just tell in body language in certain times where a team is just locked in and they will just die for their coach. And not in a, oh my gosh, I love Clay Helton, I'm so sad to see him go sense, but in I'm going to give everything I have for this guy on the field. And his teams absolutely display that. So I think he's, easily the first one they should do. And his buyout's actually kind of small. It's only $4 million, which is interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting because it seemed to me he re-upped pretty recently with Penn State.
He did. And I think at some point these, when you do these re-ups, a coach has more leverage so they can get more money and less buyout just because.
Yeah.
Why not? Right.
So, Brian, do you agree with James Franklin, or is there another guy you like a little more?
I mean, I think he's up there. I think with the recruiting, it's like if you look at what he's done, there's good and there's bad. Like right now, if you look at the state of Pennsylvania, he's got most of the top recruits committed. You look last year, all of a sudden, people were picking off people in Pennsylvania. The one 5-star quarterback went to Ohio State somehow. But and one of the questions with quarterback recruiting is they've had a bunch of guys transfer, and the guy I mentioned they didn't get him. So it's that's one of the things with at USC. You're gonna have all this QB talent. How are you gonna manage that? Are you gonna like fall in love with a guy, and then the rest of the guys in the QB room are gonna realize that and leave? So that's kind of one of my concerns there with the recruiting. But I definitely like agree with that. Just as far as like a front man in recruiting, like he's got that personality, and he seems like the type of guy, you know, with a head coach, like you're not doing the day-to-day recruiting when you're supposed to come there at the end and sell yourself and sell the program. He seems like a guy that can close, and generally just kind of whatever position the guy's playing, he's gonna like James Franklin.
So my concern with getting James Franklin is, does he want to leave Penn State for USC? Now, I think we all agree USC is a better job, but is it that much better to leave the security of where you are? He seems to like it there. That's my only question: is can they pull that one off? Do you guys have like kind of a feel on if that's not going to be an issue, or is that actually the biggest issue right now in trying to get him?
I think it's got to be the Big Ten. Does he think he can overcome Ohio State, Michigan?
Yeah, to your point, you look at the Pac-12, and you know there's no equivalent of Ryan Day and this awesome offense that's getting top 3 classes. Oregon's recruiting very well, but I'm sure Brian will agree with me that a lot of what Cristobal's been doing these last couple of years looks a lot like what Sark did in terms of just pissing away talent and just not getting the best out of what he should be able to. Oregon won the Pac-12 last season, but they lost 3 of their last 4 games. That's the big bad monolith that we have to overtake. Certainly not an impossible task compared to, overtaking Ohio State as the dominant force in your conference.
Yeah.
Oregon's benefited from basically guys who wanted to go to USC, but they just weren't sold on Clay at the end.
Exactly.
It's just like USC almost flipped Justin Flo, despite pretty much not being in it for most of the time. But he just couldn't pull the trigger on Clay Helton.
And that's the thing, right? If you just get an average coach, someone who can actually appeal to people, who in their right mind is going to go to Eugene over Los Angeles? It's that shouldn't be. And nothing against Eugene, Oregon. I'm sure it's a lovely place, but come on, you're playing in, maybe the sports city in America, and all the fun that comes with that. The weirdest name that came up in the USC head talk, and it's such garbage, it came from one guy speculating, but he actually brought up Brian Kelly. And that seems kind of crazy to me, because there was once upon a time, there was an old line saying the 3 toughest or biggest jobs in America was being president, being mayor of New York, and then being head coach at Notre Dame. I don't know why, if Kelly leaves, it would be for another college program. I think it's NFL for him. I mean, I can't imagine you guys even remotely considered that, but have you heard of that rumor at all?
I've heard of people liking him for the USC job, not like anything like interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a fan of Kelly, going back to even his Central Michigan days. I had heard a little bit of stuff, I think, in the 2015 cycle. I don't know. We do this like every other year, so I get confused. It's more often than Olympics. So I get my coaching searches mixed up sometimes. But I thought in 2015 there was a little bit something there. The thing is, too, I just don't know if Brian Kelly and that bright orange face really goes with the school colors. It's kind of a bad mix.
Well, also, you can't leave for your rival. Like, even if you wanted to go to another college program, you can't go to USC. Like, that is like an unwritten rule there. It's like Jim Harbaugh going to Ohio State. Like, you can't do that. If you're going to go somewhere else, go to Alabama or Texas or something, or go have your career end in Texas, basically.
Yeah, it's like Florida State fans who think they can get Urban.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. Is I was talking to Buck about this because he made a good point. Who does your rivals not want you to have? Right. And we all wanted you to have Clay Helton. So that was a good sign. Like I was saying, a year ago, we even said on the show, we were petrified of the thought of Urban Meyer going to USC. Like, that to me, like I was saying, I think James Franklin at USC makes this game better. I'm not terrified of, being sent back into the mid 2000s with him there. But with Urban Meyer, I genuinely fear never beating USC again. So I really hope that one doesn't happen. But he could be past his prime too. Who knows what's going on with him these days?
Huh.
Well, if you're scared of Urban Meyer going to USC, how scared do you think Shelley Meyer is of him going into Los Angeles and living there?
Yeah, if he's having problems in transfers in Cincinnati, I think it's going to be a little different going out.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
He'll find himself at a TikTok house at 3 a.m.
Yeah, I don't know if USC would be able to take him at this point, which sounds insane.
There's no
how much
way.
do we know about his personal issues at this point?
Yeah,
I imagine there's a lot more that's not public that a little bit of research would unveil. So let's say James Franklin isn't available for whatever reason. He's looking at the Big Ten. He thinks Michigan is a dead program, as me and Steve think. And he's thinking Ohio State is vulnerable, so he decides to stay at Penn State. Who is your, just give us 3 names from that you would kind of like, that's quasi-realistic too. I mean, we can't bring back John McKay or anything.
Well, since I'm kind of a college football nerd, I'll use the obligatory Luke Fickell because, Mike Bone hired him. The thing that's interesting, you hear enough stories that they're really oddly couched, where they say they get along. They've worked with each other, but they're not like golfing buddies kind of thing, which is interesting. So you don't know how that works out. To kind of nerd out a little bit on college football, if I wanted to do 2 other names, one definitely would be Dave Clawson. He's won a conference title, and if you win the MAC, you know what you're doing from coaching. And if you basically turn Wake Forest into a passing machine where you're putting NFL quarterbacks, you know what you're doing. And there's a crazy stat that if we throw out 2020, because we all want to throw out 2020 and on principle, for the 6 years before that, only 2 ACC teams made a bowl every year, Clemson and Wake Forest. That is nuts, in a conference with Miami and Florida State. So he knows what he's doing. The other one, I don't know if it's going to be a cultural fit, but his teams are just dynamic and brilliant to watch, is Jamie Chadwell at Coastal. I don't know if you could just bring, the Southern twang over here and recruit. It might not. Who knows culturally if that guy would fit in LA and be comfortable living in Manhattan Beach. But man, his offenses are awesome.
Interesting. What about you, Brian?
I think Luke Fickell, you have to at this point say, I think he might be the number one obvious guy at this point, just because of the one hand, the past history. I mean, he's got Cincinnati as a playoff team at this point, and we know with Bone and Sozno, they want to keep things quiet. We really haven't heard anything bubble up with Fickell, which is kind of a sign that he might actually be involved in this, because I think this is one of those coaching searches where if you start throwing your name out there, you're going to get yourself kicked out of the search. And then the one question I would have is, well, does he actually want Ohio State or maybe Michigan job more? Does he want to wait to see if Day goes to the NFL? That'd be the one question. Does he want to leave the Midwest? If he's kind of guy who hasn't really been living in a city, lives out a little bit out in the country. Does he want to live in Manhattan Beach? Because it's people in Southern California, they find it strange. There could be people that don't want to live in Manhattan Beach or the city, but there's a lot of people that think California is weird. So he might be one of them. I don't know. And then,
well, there's also a flight risk with him too, right? Because if that Ohio State job does open up, he could be, because that's his alma mater, right? That'd be tough for him to turn down.
Yep.
Yeah. If I was negotiating, I'd be like, well, we're just going to have an additional $20 million buyout for Ohio State. Reaction.
Thinking like a lawyer.
Yeah.
So sorry to cut you off. You seem to have other names there too. Because to me, I only know of those 2 guys, Franklin and Fickell. I don't think of Matt Campbell as a candidate, really. Is that one of the guys, though?
No. I think the other one is Dan Aranda, because if on paper you look at the things you would want for a USC coach, he hits almost all of them, except he doesn't have a long history of head coach experience. USC was actually going to hire him to be the defensive coordinator after he won the national championship, and then he got the Baylor job, so that fell through. But you're talking about a guy who's been an elite defensive coordinator. He's a likable guy. We don't know how much he great he is at recruiting because he's usually a coordinator. They don't recruit as much, but he seems capable in that part. He's from Southern California. He had a rough first year, but I mean, that was 2020. He's doing pretty well at Baylor at this point. So, like, it's kind of like if he was maybe 4 more years into his head coaching experience, he might just be like a knockout guy. And then another one who's kind of in a similar vein is Jeff Hafley, another guy who worked at because with Aranda, he's also, won a national championship at an elite program. Hafley's worked at a elite program, great defensive coordinator. He's doing pretty well at Boston College. So if you're trying to project not just like who's the best coach right now or 2 years ago, who we think is going to be the best coach in 3-4 years, I think Aranda and Hafley are guys who stick out. But there's a little bit of projection there.
One thing on Aranda, I really like that name too. He, as you said, had a really rough 2020, but he actually did something that a lot of new coaches wouldn't do. He made a bad hire in Fedora, and he realized it, and he said, we got to split ways here. And you don't see a lot of new coaches have the spine to do that right away. Just say, after year one, this isn't working out. They're just trying to find their way, and it was a pretty grown-up decision. And not only that, he brought in a really, really good OC to replace him in Grimes, and it's working out great. And, it's so unfair that Baylor's made like 3 really good hires in a row here. What did they do? Okay, they pray on Sundays and stuff. I guess that's all it takes. I don't know.
That reminds me of an old Lou Holtz joke, actually, when they were playing Miami in '88 in that famous game. I don't know if it was someone on the Miami side came over to Lou Holtz and they're like, best of luck today, coach, but, God doesn't care who wins this game. And Lou Holtz said, yeah, you're right, but his mother sure does. So I got 2 things. I'm going to pitch it over to Steve. First, and I got to hear from the SC fans on this, though. Do you think Luke Fickell beating Notre Dame, and not just beating Notre Dame, but going to Notre Dame and beating them, has really stirred interest even more so at Southern Cal? Because that is obviously something you're supposed to do, is beat your rivals. Is that something that you think that may have helped his cause?
Yeah, plus because, you're not supposedly one of the top conferences. Like, that's the big measuring point. Can you go somewhere, not just beat a big top team, but go there and do it? And the Cincinnati thing is, the longer it goes, the more real it seems as far as his ability to create a culture and win at that level.
Yeah, I think he was going to be a candidate regardless, unless Cincinnati just imploded, because the results are absolutely there. But and I never thought of that. That's a really good question that you pose. And I think what it does is it enhances it in that it makes it a lot more saleable to the USC fans who always want to win the press conference. And when you can say this guy's beaten Notre Dame, that goes a long way to winning the press conference.
Well, and that's kind of the thing with programs in college football. Look, there's 130 plus teams. Not everyone's competing for a national championship. Then you got the conferences, if you're in one, to compete for. But the other thing you have to hang your hat on at the end of the day is beating your rival. Like, that is a benchmark for every program, is to beat the other team. And whereas USC has not been in the national championship conversation, but they've had some Pac-12 runs. The next thing on that checklist is, are you beating Notre Dame and UCLA? And I think that's something that Luke Fickell, has obviously demonstrated he can do, which is a big deal, especially going to South Bend, because that's been a place you guys have had a lot of trouble with recently. Steve, what I want to get you in on is I want you to be that opposite fan here. Who don't you want USC to hire? Like, who terrifies you? Is there anyone who terrifies you? Because, like, for me, I obviously don't want Fickell or Franklin there, but I think we can be fine with it. Is there anyone for you that's like an absolute no?
Dabo. I mean, if things go completely off the rails in Clemson this year, and then he ends up out
really
west.
Interesting. That's a really interesting name. I never thought of that.
At this point, I mean, if they get Saban by some miracle, which, let's face it, that's not happening. Like, he's obviously like Lord Vader. He's the terrifying coach of football. You know how many Notre Dame fans have said over the years, because Nick Saban is Catholic, he is going to end up at Notre Dame. He's not going anywhere. That guy is going to, after he's done at Alabama, he will disappear back into the depths of hell where he came from.
Anyway, sorry, Steve, keep going.
No, you're exactly correct. I mean, the guy's 70 years old, right? So even if by some miracle Saban ends up there, how long does he have to build, right? So we're taking Saban off the table. Then you have Dabo. Who knows? I mean, the odds that things go completely off the rails and then somehow he gets fired from Clemson after bringing them so much success recently, I just don't see that coming. Although he would be a scarier coach. It's not going to be, I don't know. I don't want to see
Marcus Freeman.
Well, of course, I don't want to see Marcus Freeman there.
That would scare me.
I don't. It's just at this point, I feel like anyone who could possibly go there is just going to be good, probably really good, but I don't foresee them just like overnight jumping over the Notre Dame program, maybe catching up to and having some more competitive games. Maybe, it's start to get more of a 60-40, even 50-50 split series, and they could get into national contention. But like, I don't foresee us traveling back in time to, like you said, the early 2000s where we were just getting smushed every time. I think we've just built ourselves up too much. So I hope they don't get like the world's greatest, coach. And I obviously don't want them to have too much success, but I think whoever they get, even if they do, start to light the fire and reignite that program, I'm not scared of kind of time traveling back. Like I mentioned, I think we're kind of set up at this point for success. And that's why I'm not really afraid.
I'll tell you why I'm afraid. And that's because we claim the same number of championships. And we can get into the championships. Notre Dame really has more. Notre Dame has a higher standard of claiming. You guys claim 2003, despite us having a BCS championship game that you didn't play in. But
Rigged.
that's what scares me is even though, like, I know you guys aren't as many titles as us, you would claim more than us if you win the next one. And Michigan, too. You both claim 11. And we only claim 11, too. And it's like that scares me because one thing we have over usually our rivals is, puff out our chest. We got the history, we got the titles. Well, USC would be claiming more. So I'm terrified of a coach that can go win a championship there. And it's so possible. Buck and I spoke about who's most likely to come back of all the big programs that have kind of struggled. You got Miami, you got Michigan, Nebraska, USC, Texas. To me, it's USC by a mile because there is so much recruiting potential there. And you don't really have that at Michigan because you're getting out-recruited by Penn State and Ohio State. Miami,
and
I
Notre
would
Dame.
say, and Notre Dame. And I'd say Miami is second because you got a lot of that Florida talent, but you're competing with Florida State and you're competing with Florida. Nebraska, I'm sorry, it's not the 90s anymore. I just don't see them coming back. I don't see Tennessee coming back. So to me, it's just USC is, Texas is, I think, just a meme at this point. I don't see how Texas ever comes back. And they never really were that dominant to begin with. USC is the one that scares me. So, I hope that makes you guys feel better that, we are terrified of the sleeping giant. But for the time being, it's been pretty Notre Dame. I do want to bring up things you guys wanted to talk about too. Buck, you were talking about offensive and defensive power ratings and how they've changed under assistance with Clay Helton. Is there anything you wanted to kind of touch on there before we kind of move into maybe more Notre Dame conversation?
Yeah, this is interesting. So, I have my power ratings that basically say how does a team stack up against an average FBS team against another average FBS team. And what's interesting is, that big Sam Darnold year, 2017, USC was about a 7, which is really good. It's like, top 10 or 15% nationally. After that, you had the T. Martin disaster, the single year, and that was just awful. We were basically a 0. We were no better than your average team. Since then, when Harold came in, his first year it was a 7, which is really, really good again. And this is what's interesting. 2020 I'm throwing out because there weren't enough data points. This year USC is a 3, and it kind of speaks to two things. Number one, just the more that Helton's been in the program, the physicality's just had a deterioration. And number two, I think it was Brock Heward made a really good point during when USC was playing a Washington State, and Jackson Dart just comes off the bench and throws for 400 yards out of nowhere. And Brock Heward made a great point. He said, quarterbacks do their best in this system in their first year because they don't have to overthink it. And I'm thinking that you're seeing now under USC, that whole program is overthinking stuff, and you need just basically the people who know the less to execute the best.
Now, Steve, who does that sound like? That quarterbacks are good in their first year. Is that not Notre Dame in a nutshell, right? Is quarterbacks great in year one when they have to take over and learn a basic, playbook? Or because it seems like that's been the case. I think Ian Book actually last year. Yeah, Kaiser before that. I think Ian Book last year was the exception because he actually had probably his best season in his third year. Anyway, I also wanted to get to Brian because you want to talk about coin tosses and middle eights, right? Because you're also an analytics guy and have some interesting data of your own that we're trying to portray to our audience that there's more to football than just what you see on Saturdays.
Yeah, the funny thing is USC won the first two in their games, the coin toss, so they deferred. Then the next four games, they've lost, not deferred, and that might seem like trivial or to some, and it might. A lot of games it might be, but those first two games there was no big advantage in the middle eight. But majority of the last four games they've just gotten blown out in the middle eight of the football game, and it's been to the point where like you kind of see it coming, and then after the first 4 minutes of the third quarter, you're like, this game's over. Like they just blew the game, and like I've said it online. I've said it to myself, I noticed it, and it's held true. And another thing is just the total inconsistency is. They've alternated wins and losses. And so if you look at like the spread of like how they performed against the spread, they were plus 9.5, then minus 31.5, plus 24, minus 28, plus 14, minus 19. So those aren't, it's not a little bit, those are huge swings.
Yeah.
And I looked on like team rankings and their inconsistency rating, which I'm not totally sure how that's measured, but it was like some really high, like in the 80s or 90s or 100s. You just don't really know what you're getting from this team at this point. And like, even if you look at like, you go by like unit by unit, like I can point to pretty much any position group and say they've had a good game here, bad game here. And you just don't know when it's coming. Like the run games looked good, then looked bad. Quarterbacking, like Jackson Dart was great, but Keaton Slovis has been kind of mediocre at some points. I thought the DBs were pretty good early on, and then we've seen them get torched. Really, the only unit, and this is kind of surprising, that's been pretty consistent is the offensive line, which has usually been pretty bad at USC. Like they've quietly been done pretty well with pass protection, and all of a sudden our run game is useful at some points.
I think this will be the first year I would ever say I would rather USC's offensive line than Notre Dame's. It's been pretty brutal. Steve, we've been talking about why USC's been bad for a while, but that's not the only reason Notre Dame has been beating them. What do you think Notre Dame has done well in the last 10 years, right? Because there seemed to have been a switch around 2010, 2011, 2012, where USC was coming down off the Carroll years and Notre Dame was coming up through the Kelly years. And that 2012 season, USC was ranked number 1 preseason. Notre Dame was unranked. And that last game of the year, Notre Dame was ranked number 1 and USC was unranked. And that was the game, which to me is still one of the biggest games I ever recall, was to get into that BCS title game. In the last 10 years, these programs have kind of changed places. What do you kind of attribute that on Notre Dame's behalf? Like, what have we done well?
We've become bullies in the trenches. You think back to name the offensive line in the NFL right now that has a 9-10 figure contract, whatever those would be for like hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Ronnie Staley, Mike McGlinchey, all those. Like the offensive line has gotten significantly better over the course of time. Obviously, this year for Notre Dame is kind of a tweener and an anomaly in recent history. And then on the defensive side of the football, starting in 2012, when we had Stephon Tuitt, we had Lewis Nix, and then we've just kind of had some guys come on through over the course of the last few years with Adi Ogundeji and just name a defensive end or edge rusher, even Jerry Tillery in the middle. So just the ability for us to start, I think, controlling the pace of games. You think of that big Josh Adams run a couple years ago. I mean, the holes just opened wide up because of the offensive line. So I think that's where obviously we've been on the rise, and USC is subsequently, unfortunately for them, taken a little bit of a step back. And I think that's where, if you can have as talented of a wide receiver like Amon-Ra St. Brown, and you could have a great quarterback to get him that ball, but if you only have 2.5 seconds to do so, it's going to be tough. So, they're still a great skill position school by and large at USC, but until they get back into the trenches, I don't see them kind of fighting with Notre Dame. And that's kind of my analysis of the circumstances.
So I don't think it's mutually exclusive where like Notre Dame has to be good, so USC has to be bad. I think that's been coincidence for the last 3 decades. So Buck, you've lived through it all, right? You lived through the 90s, you lived through the good years of the 2000s, and you're in this era. Was there a point ever, let's say in the late 2000s, where it felt like your domination of Notre Dame was never going to end, especially where Notre Dame had fallen off a cliff from what Lou Holtz had left to what it was right before Brian Kelly?
I think it really reached that point, I want to say in 2009. Would that have been Clausen's last season?
Yes.
I remember just seeing random stuff on message boards about this is the year, and people are going to, because they're going to see it in person. I don't even have a place to stay. I'm just going to be a part of the experience. And there was such a huge belief. And SC had started to deteriorate. They actually were pretty poor that year. They wound up going to the Emerald Bowl or whatever it is in San Francisco. And when they won that year, it just seemed like, well, geez, I mean, this is a really down year for us. And Notre Dame's at a fever pitch and believing. It just, at that point, it kind of seemed that, there's kind of like almost a cleavage there between the two. But then you all got Brian Kelly, and just to kind of go back to that 2012 time that you're seeing. I don't know the program as well as you do, but I'm just guessing from afar that Charlie Weiss didn't leave a lot of Brian Kelly kind of guys in the program. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah.
Yeah. Manti Te'o was the only guy really from that team.
Yeah. And Brian Kelly is an acquired taste. And I think it probably took him a little time to figure out how to recruit to Notre Dame versus Cincinnati and Central Michigan. He's an awesome coach. Like I said, I've been a fan of his since Central Michigan. He's so good that he turned programs into such awesome programs that even Butch Jones didn't look like an idiot when he came in afterwards. And now we look how that's turning out now. So I think that's really, you have that flip too. So you have the little transitory period, until 12. And I think that's really when, there was just a big divergence. And like you said, SC was the number one preseason, and just it hasn't been the same since then.
Now, Brian, do you kind of see it the same way? And to kind of add on top of that, 2012 Notre Dame was really good, which, by the way, they vacated all those wins, which you guys also have had things vacated. I think we can both be in principle against that. But Notre Dame wasn't still very good after 2012. They were mediocre. It was only 2017 onwards that this team has been in that playoff conversation every year. As an SC fan watching that, what do you attribute it to, and does it bother you that kind of Notre Dame is getting back to kind of the best they've been since Lou Holtz?
Yeah, I think it was like early 2010s, or the game where we were at Notre Dame, and afterwards one of our linebackers was like, "Yeah, you could tell they quit." It's like one of those things you're not really supposed to say. I think he even had to apologize. And then you go, forward towards the end of the decade, and it's like whatever the score of that game was, it didn't compare to some of the blowouts that we faced. So I think when I look at Notre Dame, what I think Brian Kelly's done a really good job is kind of like an NFL approach, is you got to beat your division, build your team to beat your division. He's built a team that's done really well against their schedule. And it's like you guys said, it's the lines. Like they're one of the top teams in the past 5-10 years in offensive line and defensive line. So that the floor of Notre Dame is always really, really high. And what we noticed when they gone to the playoffs is they just didn't have like the wide receiver talent. They compete with, say, like in Alabama. And that's one of those things where you're like, oh, their wide receivers aren't great. But it's like, well, the reason they're there, though, is because they met the standard of, in the trenches. And so that's kind of what we're seeing at USC is our offensive line. Like we've had some first rounders, but the lines themselves have been really poor. And then defensive line has kind of been all over the map. Like even this year, we were supposed to have a great unit. I think it may have been a few days. I don't know if it was a few games before we got a sack or before like Drake Jackson got a sack. And he's supposed to be our star player. And, we had so many guys go down at nose tackle, which is why anyone can just run up the middle on us, like in the Stanford game. So we're really just not there at that point in the lines, the trenches.
Yeah, and I think that's something. Another thing Kelly's done great is beating the rivals. That's one thing I think a lot of Notre Dame fans, even if you don't like him, you kind of have to give him credit for. He's got an outstanding record against SC. He's got a great record against Michigan State. The only one he struggled with was Stanford, which is that's just hilarious to me. It's kind of cute that we can't beat Stanford. Stanford's Stanford, and they give you guys hell every year too. So there's something about Stanford.
I think we're their biggest game.
Yeah, well, they that Notre Dame game's pretty big for them too, because that's often their last game of the year. Something I want to ask you guys, because I imagine as human beings you're also sick of Alabama, just winning every year. So let's say Bama and Notre Dame were in a title game. Is there even a thought to cheer for Notre Dame there, or would you still be happy with Nick Saban winning his 15th national championship?
I mean, are we counting this point? Like, does it matter how many he has?
Good point. Buck, you don't strike me as a guy who hates us. So would you be cheering for us in that game, or are you still going Bama?
Well, you gave a really rough choice there, and I think of the Good Will Hunting, where it just says I'll go with the wrench. I don't know if you know that reference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I can't help you with that one. It would just depend on if I have a bet on the game. That's about as far as my votes will go on that one.
No, that's fair enough. There's respect between the programs, but I don't know if there's that much respect where you would. I mean, maybe if we played UCLA, that would be, maybe you would cheer for Notre Dame.
That's totally different. Yeah,
that's easy.
A UCLA championship would be apocalyptic.
Yeah, but that's never going to happen. So what's even the point there? I got some question for you guys, but let's break it up for a moment. Just a palate cleanser. Let's talk about the upcoming week and games we got for the week to pick. Just before we get into that, also want to let our listeners at home know that you can support our podcast through listener support. It's anchor.fm/horsemanpod or something like that. You could find it in the description of the podcast below. You can make a monthly contribution, and that would help us sustain the quality of work that we put out because, as you guys know, Steve, P, and myself are very busy. But yeah, so that's greatly appreciated. And let's get into this week's games. Not the best slate of games, but I think I've picked some interesting ones for you all. So we'll do that. We'll do it in this rotation. I'll Brian, then Steve, and then Buck, and then me. So we'll be able to get through this quite efficiently here. So game one, Wake Forest at Army. I think that is a super interesting game because you got a Wake Forest team that's really surprising everybody, and you've got a dang good, solid Army team. So Brian, who do you like there?
Yeah, I'll go with Wake Forest. I mean, Army is making you think about it, but I'm still going to go with Wake Forest.
Cool. Steve?
I'm going to break my cardinal rule and go with the old school wing offense in this case. So I'm begrudgingly going with Army. Everything is telling me that, not to take them, but I am. I don't know. I'm in my own head.
All right, Buck?
Yeah, I'm going to say a couple of things that are odd here. First of all, as I just said, I love Clausen. It's kind of hard for me to go against him here, but my metrics actually say that these teams are pretty even, which comes down to something that is not something you hear every day, which the home field of Mikey Field could be the difference. Not too often that's said, so I'll go with Army in a close one.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting game because of that. I'm going to go Wake Forest here. I kind of bought into what they're doing offensively, and I kind of like to see them mess up the ACC a little bit. So, yeah, that's where I'm going. The next one we got is a super interesting matchup because Purdue just upset Iowa, and they are hosting Wisconsin. Brian, who do you like in that Big Ten matchup there?
I mean, it still feels weird to say it, but I'm going to take Purdue over Wisconsin. Wisconsin hasn't given enough, to be that confident in their typical performances.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Steve, are you in agreement, or do you like Wisco?
Oh man, I did like Wisco to begin, but at this point, I think Graham Mertz is just absolutely incompetent. So I'm going to go with Purdue. I think they're riding a hot hand right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Buck?
Yeah, I've been a Mertz truther for quite some time now. Having said that, by far, according to my metrics, the outstanding unit here is still the Wisconsin defense. There are 14, which is crazy. Mertz does them no favors, but I'm showing Wisconsin about a field goal better, and I will absolutely feel stupid when Mertz throws 3 stupid interceptions and they 17-14.
All right. I'm going to go with Purdue as well. I think we saw it when they played Notre Dame that there was talent there. And they are maybe the only Big Ten team other than Ohio State who can throw the ball. Well, we'll see with Michigan State. But I kind of like Purdue for this game, so I'm going to go with the Boilermakers as well. I like that we got a good mix here, though. Everybody's kind of got a different opinion on it, which is nice. So the next one, Pac-12 specialty, Oregon at the UCLA Bruins. How are my Trojan friends going to take that one? Brian, you go first.
I mean, I'm happy to see that the Blooms come off of UCLA's hot start. So
yeah. I'll
go with Oregon, but I'm completely prepared for Mario Cristobal to do something dumb in game management and make it tight.
That's a fair point. Steve?
I am picking what I am just rooting for and trying to will into the universe, which is a 2-loss Pac-12 winner. So I'm very sorry to our friends who are joining us on the call, but I'm going with the Bruins.
Interesting.
Yeah. Surprisingly, I don't even have this one as close. I've got UCLA about 8 points better. And that just speaks to really what's the term I use? Anti-magician Cristobal is.
He's a magician in that he can make a lead go away.
Yeah. No, he makes talent disappear, I guess, right?
I thought I'd be the only one here, but I'm taking UCLA as well. I think Oregon is just looking like a loss is coming. I think that 2-loss Pac-12 champion is more likely than not. And I don't think they're the only conference that might have that. So yeah, I'm taking the Bruins. They're flashy. There's moments where they look really good, and there's moments where they look really bad. I'm actually, and I had said this before, I'm interested in the UCLA USC game this year. I think that's going to be a very even matchup. But we'll see ultimately. So next we've got an LSU team who upset Florida and then let their head coach go. Is that breaking news today? Was Oregon and Coach Oregon
minutes ago?
Yeah,
minutes before
end
we started
of the season.
Wow. So we got an LSU Tigers team with coaching issues at Ole Miss. That is a rivalry. I had to deep into my memory of like college football rivalries, and LSU Ole Miss is an old one. So Brian, who do you like there?
I mean, at this point, Ole Miss obviously has a better team, and I don't think Kiffin can allow Edo to beat him at this point. So I'm taking Ole Miss.
Steve?
I was going to go with LSU, but now without a coach to lead the way, I'm going to switch sides and go with Ole Miss. Really good passing offense, and that's the efficiency, right? So I'm rolling with them.
I think he's still there. He's just leaving at the end of the season.
Oh, I thought it was effective immediately.
Oh, I have to look it up.
I might very well be incorrect here. I don't know, but
yeah, with Steve, that's the most likely outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I see headlines and then I just react. I don't read into it.
Well, if head coach Ed Orgeron is there, is he really there?
It's a good point.
He will not return in 2022.
Okay, so he'll just see out the season. That's a very strange to be.
Are you still taking Ole Miss then? Take LSU, you coward.
Yeah, I'm gonna flip back to LSU then. Sorry for my dog barking in the background like a little rat. LSU. I'm gonna go on mute.
This guy flips more than what was that quarterback's name? Gunnar Kiel. There we go. That guy flipped to 5 different programs. Buck, do you like are you a truther like I am with Matt Corral or Corral or whatever you say his name?
Well, truther in what regard? Like the guy's just like sneakily just absolutely awesome, the Superman of the SEC. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I look at this game and it's just crazy. Ole Miss had that insane game against Arkansas 2 weeks ago, and Arkansas was ranked at the time. I think they were top 10 or just borderline top 10. And then they have this whole mustard bottle on the field nonsense game in Kiffin's return. And then LSU is coming off of just absolutely getting just crushed versus Kentucky, and then an out of nowhere win over Florida. I think the lesson here is in the SEC West, there's no football refractory period. It just, it is what it is, man. Having said that, by far the best squad here is the Ole Miss offense. They're a 10, which is, pretty darn elite. And if you see it, it makes sense what you see on the field. So I got them pretty easily here.
Yeah, I agree. I like the Rebels this year. I'm a big believer in whoever has the better quarterback, in not every circumstance, but in a lot of them. So that's kind of where I land there. And LSU's been a little too inconsistent. The last game, and this is kind of a late addition because Clemson just kind of sucks this year, and Pitt turns out to be really good. So Clemson at Pitt. I don't even know what the line is, but I imagine that's actually going to be very close. Brian, who do you like there?
Yeah, at this point, I can't trust the Clemson offense, and it looks like they might have broken DJU. Sorry about the dog. And yeah,
no, it's all right.
Their offensive stats are just so good at this point. Like, it just feels like one of those ones. If you bet on Clemson, you're gonna regret it after like 20 minutes. So I gotta take Pitt.
Yeah, fair enough. Steve, you kind of like Dabo a lot over there. So are you taking the Tigers, or are you going with the upset?
I am going with the upset. It does appear that Pitt is, and Pitt's always a tough team to play. They're just,
Especially for us.
Especially for us. But I think there's just an embodiment of the city there, and kind of the way they run the program, just kind of blue collar guys. So I just don't see, the quarterback. Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot his name. But
Pickett.
Yeah, exactly. No, the
Pinkett.
other. No, the Clemson quarterback, DJ.
DJ.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's just not great. He's just not that great, and his offense kind of stinks. And I think that, Pittsburgh at home is going to take advantage of that.
Interesting. Buck, are you going to break the trend here and go Clemson, or are you liking the Pitt offense?
Well, first of all, not to pick on Brian, but I'm having a hard time going from somebody regret betting on Clemson to the logical conclusion of, well, then we bet on Pat Narduzzi. That's kind of tough. Clemson has just been an absolute ATM. I don't think they've covered this year, and in conference, they haven't even been close. They are still overrated. So like you, I'm curious to see what the line's going to be. The line's been off by like about 10 points every week. I've got Pitt by 6.5 better, and I think they win. I like Pickett. I think Pickett's going to be one of the biggest challenges that Clemson defense, which is awesome, has faced. Not that he's, otherworldly, but he's going to be different from what they've seen. I think it's going to be too much. And yeah, that DJU is broken.
Yeah, that's interesting. That means Clemson's going to win, because I also think Pitt's going to win, and the four of us taking Pitt is not a good sign. P-Wagon's picks for this week was Army, Purdue, Oregon, Ole Miss, and Clemson. So maybe Pitt has a saving grace after all. So let's get back to what we're here for, NDSC. What I find interesting about this is we're both kind of the bad guys. Like, Notre Dame's got that Yankees bad guy thing where, they're annoying, they're everywhere, they used to be the Death Star. And USC kind of invites the bad guy thing, right? They got a darker tone to their songs, and it's a Coliseum, and it's LA. You're inclined to hate them anyway. So you got a really interesting matchup here. So I got some questions for you guys. And this is what I was thinking as a Notre Dame fan. So these are some propaganda questions. But I am curious. So theoretically, USC has just joined the SEC like everybody. They only have room for one annual out-of-conference rivalry. Are you keeping Notre Dame or UCLA on the schedule?
Oh, that's not even close. It's got to be Notre Dame. That would drive UCLA nuts.
That would be the main motivation.
Yeah, you picked Notre Dame to upset UCLA. That's petty, and I like it. Sorry, Brian. Are you also taking Notre Dame on that schedule?
Yeah, just for the same reason. That'd just be too funny.
But even if that means your strength of schedule is now absurd because you're in the SEC and you get Notre Dame.
I say we just get as many teams as possible to up their strength of schedule and just forget about the rest. Even though that'd probably be terrible for college football.
Okay, that's a good answer. I think I would imagine you would take Notre Dame just because it's a bigger football rivalry, right? There's more at stake when these teams clash than UCLA, which is, not a football school.
Yeah,
they're not
USC
really-
doesn't want to lose their weekenders. They want the Chicago trip every 2 years.
Yeah, and Notre Dame Stadium is fun. That is a fun game to always go to. You got the touchdown Jesus in the background and the Golden Dome. There is something about that trip that's worth it. All right, question number 2. And I'm a big history guy. I have my own rankings and categories, so I know where I put them. But where do you rank USC all time as like a historical success for a program? Like, where are you on that list?
Oh my gosh. Wow.
That's a tough one, yeah. But
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
curious
all
how you
about
see
the
yourselves.
metrics.
Yeah, it depends. And I got my own ranking, so I know where I put you. But I'm curious what the USC perception of yourselves is. Like, are you the greatest of all time? Are you kind of in that middle of the pack? Like, what is Trojan Nation thinking of themselves?
Well, if you cut it off at like 2008 and ask the question, then I think we can make a strong case for number one. But these past 12 years, you have to be honest with yourself. There's a few schools that have moved ahead. So I mean, at this point, I think, are we allowed to say anyone other than Alabama at number one?
Well, I would make an argument for not Alabama at number one, but Buck, what
Are we talking? So we're talking more historical overall instead of just.
Yeah, like overall, you would
10 years.
aggregate. Yeah, and I think that's USC's strength that Alabama doesn't have is it's a little more consistent historically. But Buck, I'm interested in your perspective here. Not that I've expected you to contemplate it and crunch the numbers, but kind of how do you see yourself?
Yeah, I think first of all, it depends who you ask. If you ask the people at the Maria del Rey Yacht Basin, you'll probably say USC is number one forever. So, if we get kind of back on this planet though, I kind of see USC as like maybe at the bottom of that top tier. Notre Dame's just had a little bit more. I think what Alabama's done just puts them above as well. A program like Oklahoma gets overlooked, but geez, I mean,
Absolutely.
God, how many titles did Bob Stoops win? I mean, he won that conference like every freaking year. It's nuts.
I've seen them win like an ESPN article on this.
Yeah. So I'd say probably around that. I mean, after that, it's kind of debatable who else you'd put ahead of SC. You could have some kooky people in the Midwest who would say Nebraska, who just kind of haven't really come to terms with life. I'm kind of curious who else even would be in that conversation. Maybe a Miami and a Florida State, but they were just kind of like one kind of long-term extended periods of success. Miami actually had two. Maybe Miami, but they were just nothing before Schnellenberger as well. So talking it out, I'd say definitely top 5, but closer to 5 than 1.
Interesting. So this has been a project of mine since I was 15. I've been fascinated with this question of, all time, how do you stack everyone? And I look at a lot of factors, and I actually weigh for eras too. Like I give more points for recent national champions than I would, Michigan championships. No offense to Michigan, but 1900 championships are not
Offense to Michigan fans.
Yeah, fuck them. So I got USC 3, and I think that's only recently that they've fallen to 3. I think historically USC has been number 2 because USC has won in the 20s and in the 30s and a bunch in the 60s and 70s. And then they, crushed it in the 2000s. They got tied for the most Heismans all time. I don't care what you say. Reggie Bush won that Heisman. Give it back to him. Wins, bowls. USC, I think, actually has won the most bowl games of all time. Like, even conference titles, I do consider that as well. USC is up there. You know what I mean? I respect the hell out of them. Steve, you're kind of a blue blood, connoisseur as well. How do you kind of, where would you put them?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, top 5. But who do you think would even be able to jump them or surpass them at this point?
I got Oklahoma 4 and Ohio State 5.
Yeah, Oklahoma, Ohio State. I was thinking they're probably still ahead of Miami and Florida State. And, there's not much else really in the conversation for historical. I mean, maybe Clemson is still kind of on the up and up, but they they have at least another decade of sustained success to go to get into that conversation, I think. So, yeah.
There is Michigan, depending on how you view wins from 150 years ago. But, I mean, they think they're up there. I'd put them 6, but
yeah,
you know,
I mean that's like Montreal Canadiens fans though, like getting really thrilled about winning Stanley Cups when there was only 6 teams in the league. So,
mind you, that's when the Bruins won their cups too. But
let's not get there.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think they're definitely top 5, and there's argument for sure that they're top 3. Absolutely.
Okay, so here's the second half of that question. Where do you rank Notre Dame? So, Brian, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on the top 5 is pretty locked in at this point. And yeah, I put Alabama 1, and then I don't know how to do like Oklahoma and Ohio State, because they usually are like one of the 2 more consistent schools, but I don't know how many championships they really get. And yeah, I mean, at this point, I guess you nudge Notre Dame above USC, not 2-3, just because. I mean, I think the one big strike against us is we have 0 playoff appearances.
Yeah, that's true. And so, Buck, at least maybe this is controversial, but not that I would consider someone to be a much littler brother, but in that rivalry, I would think of USC being the littler brother. Not that they're a big gap, but I've always thought of Notre Dame ahead of USC. Would you agree, or do you kind of see it the other way?
You're asking a guy who basically really got into USC when Lou Holtz pretty much had the title to the Coliseum. So that's kind of my frame of reference to the being born into this world. Having said that, I guess I started looking up. And there's been just periods of going back and forth. If you kind of even them out, it's close. I would just say that USC's dry spells, I want to say, kind of tended to be a little longer, although that Ty Willingham, Charlie Weiss Valley was really tough. But that's kind of been, I think, maybe a little bit more of a USC lifestyle than Notre Dame's, if that makes sense. I'd give the nod to Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think if Alabama is number 1, it's recent because, it depends how you count titles too. Alabama claims way more than everyone, but if you kind of actually look at like what the record books show, it's very similar between Notre Dame and Alabama. So I tend to put Notre Dame 1 still because they beat Alabama in all those other categories, right? The titles are kind of a wash, but you got the All-Americans, you got the wins, you got the draft picks, you got the Hall of Famers. But look, we're scared of Alabama because they're coming for Notre Dame's spot in history. Because it seemed to me, and maybe Buck, in the 90s when you had graduated, at that point in history, Notre Dame was kind of the big deal, right? Like, because they were coming off of another title, which would have been their 11th, and that was '88.
Yeah.
We haven't won one since. So there's an argument that we've fallen off recently. But when you were graduating, that would have been like the New York Yankees at the time, right? Yeah.
It literally just, and there was a lot less TV back then too. So, the whole thing was tune into NBC and, just see if Notre Dame, if there's any chance they could possibly lose to whoever, and then complain about their schedule because they're not in the conference.
Well, interesting about conferences, because that's my next question. Sorry, Steve, to skip you here, but I know where you're going to rank Notre Dame, so the audience,
of course,
audience doesn't need to put them. Here's a thought experiment, and you tell me what you think of it, because everything is realigning, the playoff is expanding, and the Pac-12 is garbage, and you guys aren't getting paid what you're owed. Thought experiment time: USC goes independent. What do you think of that?
You go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. Well, I'll say from the USC side, they're one of the first knocks against it is, well, what are we going to do about the other sports? Their Pac-12's not going to schedule us, and then usually someone's like, well, I don't care. But if we went independent, I mean, I think that really relies on, are we able to put together a good TV package similar to Notre Dame? Can we piggyback with Notre Dame in NBC? I think that would probably make sense for everyone involved. So if we could set that up, I mean, I think then the next question is scheduling, and it seems like if you could probably off the top of your head, you could probably put together 6 games pretty easily. And then are we able to fill out those last 6? And are some of those Pac-12 schools going to break? Because they're going to just band against us and say, no, we're not scheduling you for anything. And if we get a few of them to break, then we're fine.
Yeah. Buck is, as a USC guy for a long time, is the thought of being independent repulsive, or is it perhaps something that's intriguing in this new era?
It's a bit repulsive, but not as repulsive as the media rights deal that we're dealing with right now. That's just been an absolute disaster for the Pac-12 and really USC. And just to kind of grab the steering wheel for 30 seconds, what Larry Scott did was absolutely nuts. He took the third tier rights for USC football games, took them away from the school, gave them to the conference, and put those games on a network that nobody can see. So I don't have my games and I don't have my money, but other than that, it's great. And right about now, being an independent sounds a lot better than more of this.
I think, before I pass to Steve, I think what's interesting is that if there's another program out there who could be independent, it's probably USC.
Yeah.
I think Bama could do it. I think Ohio State could do it, and maybe Michigan. But none of those are realistically leaving. I think USC could realistically do it because they are huge. You can get NBC has so much time available, and Notre Dame and USC never play at the same time. So you could actually do an NBC deal. You could join some conference for your other athletics like we've done or something. I think it's just interesting, and I kind of like it because Notre Dame and USC, we don't put jersey like names on the back of our jerseys. We always wear the same jerseys. We're very old school like that, and kind of the thought of us being both the Renegades while everyone's joining the SEC, I kind of romanticize that a bit. Steve, what do you think of an independent Southern Cal? Do you think they could pull it off, and would you like to see it?
I think if they go independent, they're probably a 9+ win team every year.
Do you think their schedule is easier than what they currently have? If they go
no, I just think I don't think their schedule gets easier or more difficult. Just because the Pac-12, the upper tier of the Pac-12 is competitive. The middle and lower just tend to fall off as compared to some of the bigger conferences, and in my opinion. So I don't think that strength of schedule is going to be affected, but I think they do start to see more winning seasons just because there's more to offer with independence at that point, right? You can probably get some sort of TV deal and tell these kids, hey, you're going to be on national television XYZ amount of times, and then I don't know. I think it would give them kind of a shot in the behind, and again, this is obviously just a extremely biased point of view from someone who's been a Notre Dame fan his entire life, and that's kind of the benefits that we've seen. So that's where I come from. All
right, I've got one more, but I'll save it for the end. So right now, I saw something on Twitter. Fox College Sports tweeted it, and it's the amount of times a program has upset a top 2 ranked team. And Notre Dame has 17; it's the most ever. Ohio State's next, and then it's USC. And I thought to myself, how many times did Notre Dame and USC beat each other for that statistic? Because it seems like this rivalry has always been, with the exception of the last maybe 20 years, top Notre Dame against a top USC, or one's good and the other's bad, and the bad one upsets the good one. There just seems to be so much back and forth in this rivalry, and I kind of thought that would be a great segue into what this rivalry is and the game we're about to play. So from my perspective, Notre Dame and USC represent something that's bigger than most college football rivalries. Most rivalries are either in-state or within the same conference, right? You get Michigan and Ohio State, you have Alabama, Auburn. Notre Dame, USC, they call it the greatest intersectional rivalry, and I took issue with that on Twitter because it is the only intersectional rivalry I could find. So I say just call it the best rivalry because it represents so much, right? There's lifestyle differences right there. You got Southern Cal, you have the perception of this, this diva school, rich kids. And then you got Notre Dame, which is this Catholic, blue collar, kind of rugged school. 2 different worlds, 2 historic programs. It's red versus blue. You know what I mean? You got iconic fight songs. I actually know the lyrics to your fight song, fight on for Old SC, we're meant to fight on for victory. You know what I mean? Like there's something iconic there about both of these programs. So to me, I view this game as kind of history. We're not playing just for the season. We're playing for something bigger than that, which I don't think the other rivalries have. what I want to pitch over to you guys is, how do you perceive this rivalry? Like, what does it represent for you guys? Is it just another game on the schedule? Is it, do you buy into the, it might be the best rivalry in the sport? I'm just curious for your perspective. So, Buck, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it is the biggest game on the schedule, and that's kind of a two-sided coin. In normal, decent years, that means like, oh my God, I can't wait for this one. In a year like this year, it's kind of, okay, well, this will be fun, but let's not have a repeat of 2017 where we just get bullied and pushed around and just we're the college football clown of the week. But that just shows that, even when USC is down, this game, it is kind of ground zero for that week.
Yeah, I think what Notre Dame fans have insecurity about is being not your top priority. And that's partially because we are independent and you have a UCLA rivalry. So Notre Dame fans care a lot about the SC game. And I think there's just general insecurity. Well, do you feel the same way? Because you have your own rivalries too. Brian, how do you see this? I know we spoke about it a bit before, but it's topical.
Yeah, I probably mentioned it before. We have that saying where the best win is against Notre Dame, the worst loss is against UCLA. So, I mean, it's definitely the biggest game in that sense for our schedule. I mean, I know for me personally, I think it's one of those fun trips to do. And they're really the only opponent where I can kind of go anywhere in the country and they're going to run into someone that would, the Notre Dame fan will root against me in that sense. So I think that's kind of fun. I'm an Irish Catholic, raised that way, so I had a lot of just growing up, a lot of people rooting for Notre Dame. So sometimes I'm like, come on, man, why? Like, someone who went to USC, why are you rooting for Notre Dame? You have no other connection, but that's just how Notre Dame is.
Yeah, it's got that weird. I say Notre Dame's the only truly national program because you get fans everywhere because of identity, right? You get a lot of Irish fans, or a lot of Catholics across the country. Like in Canada, I run into more Notre Dame fans than I do anyone else, and that's partially because of the same things, right? Like the audience knows I grew up in an Irish household, so that's how I got into it. But if you're just on TV too, right? Being on NBC it has got that kind of pull. Steve, we have our own internal issues with rivals, right? We have so many of them. How do you really frame the USC game?
Definitely one of the biggest games on the schedule. It's the game I think I look forward to the most every single year. And again, I because I think of it when we're at home as a mid-season measuring stick, right? Because you're typically playing still recruitment and talent-wise high 4-star, if not 5-star athletes. So even though in recent years they've been a little bit more of a down program, our ability to show up and beat a team that has a lot of talent on the roster, that's going to let me know, kind of where we stand and how we're going to be able to compete. Are we going to be able to, make it to the playoff? If we do make it to the playoff, are we going to cover? Let's not even worry about winning first. Let's worry about covering when it comes to big games. So, yeah, that's why I love Notre Dame games at home, and then on the road, it just always feels like every time we're in the USC Coliseum, it's so much more meaningful because that we're going to get their best shot. And it's typically at that point we're like 11-0 or 10-1 and, kind of knocking on the door. And with a true rivalry game like that, you just never know. Like you have to wait until the clock strikes 00. Even in some years where we've been significantly better than USC recently, they've still kind of brought it down to the wire. So it does make for a lot more excitement. And I definitely still have a lot of resentment from that Reggie Bush push year that really breeds a dislike of the program that it just feels so much better beating them. So it's a great game. I look forward to it by and large every single year.
And I think this game, and I've ranted about this before, should be the last game of year, that Thanksgiving weekend. It should be that every year. I think that would help the rivalry get more recognition, because a lot of people who aren't historians of the game don't know we're rivals, which is crazy to me, because to me this is what I grew up with, was Notre Dame USC being that clash of two giants. But this is why, because when we do play last game of the year, it's at Southern Cal, and you have Ohio State, Michigan, noon kickoff because the Big Ten is just the worst. And then you get
Zero
Auburn,
market.
Alabama as that 3:30 kickoff. And then it's Notre Dame, USC prime time, which is their prime time programs, right? They are meant to play under the lights. When it's at USC, we play under the lights there. When it's at Notre Dame, we play 7:30 Eastern time. And that's kind of how I view these programs. I think here's like the thought experiment. Let's say all 6 of those teams I just said are ranked 1 through 6. And we're getting into like someone's going to a national title game. Every game has massive implications. I think Notre Dame USC like doubles the rest of those teams' ratings. If we have like a top 5 Notre Dame USC, I think both of them. I don't think that game even like comes close to the other games come close to it. I think that would be the most watched game because it's prime time and you have people hating both of them. And a good USC is better than a good Michigan and a good Ohio State. There's just way more like sexiness to that game. I don't know. Do you guys feel the same way, or am I getting a little too propagandist?
I think a part of it's going to be that time spot is just awesome. I'm sure Brian's had the same experience from me. There's nothing like a 5 o'clock kickoff at the Coliseum. It's just an ideal crowd. They're just sauced up enough from the full day, and it's not the 7:30 kick, which people hate. It's just the absolute peak experience. And to your point, you're going to have people that just either don't tune in earlier, or this is like, it's a build up to this. I don't know if it would double it, but I think it would be the top rated. Because if it's at the Coliseum, it would be on like ESPN or ABC. So you would have, the promotion on 2 networks, which I think would be an advantage over the other games.
Yeah, that's I just don't view Ohio State, Michigan as a broad appeal game. I think people tune in because they've been told it's the big game, but like that's not even a competitive series.
Yeah.
And it's never had any implications outside the Big Ten. Like that 7-year war or whatever they had produced 0 national championships. Notre Dame USC had like a 14-year war that had 5 national championships in it between them, from like the McKay Parsegian years were the best of any rivalry because those 2 teams were winning the titles every year. Anyway, let's just get into the game now. We've primed it up enough. You guys, I know, Buck, you have your own model for this, so I'll let you take the first crack at it. Does this game look good for SC, or is it going to be a 2017?
2017's calling, and he's he's back with a vengeance. I'll put it that way. The one thing that sticks out to me, just in first glance, is Notre Dame's offense has struggled a bit, running for less than 2.7 a carry, which is nuts. I know there's some sacks in there, but that's just crazy. The good news is your average defense that you faced is basically a 6, which is really, really good. A third of your schedules against Wisconsin and Cincinnati, which are absolutely elite. You have not faced a single defense that's as bad as what USC has faced, or as USC is, pardon me. If we look on the other side of the USC defense, they're 3-3, 3 decent defensive performances, but those are against San Jose State, Washington State, and Colorado. All those teams are well below average. They're like, bottom 30 or even worse. Any offense with a pulse basically has had its way with USC. I mean, that's just kind of what you see on the field in those other 3 games. And sadly for USC, Notre Dame has a pulse.
Brian, do you have more hope for the Trojans in this one, or are you kind of getting a little nervous for it?
Yeah, well, I saw an early line that's 4.5, and like I alluded to, UC is going to lose. They're going to lose by more than that. But I mean, if we want to do some silver linings, I think it's what he mentioned is UC's probably biggest weakness on defense is defending the run, and that's not Notre Dame's strength this year. So one of those things where you would normally say, Notre Dame's probably going to run over USC, and once they get 1 or 2 touchdowns ahead, they can just control the game. Like, that's probably not in play at this point. And the other thing is, if Jackson Dart is healthy, and it's kind of sounding like he is, they're going to have some sort of package for him. And, if you're a USC fan, basically you're crossing your fingers where they just say, okay, screw it. We're just going to let him play it out, and then he just becomes a total wild card.
What about
pretty much how we're going to win?
I just thinking for our audience here who aren't super into USC to begin with, where's Slovis for them? For those listeners who are thinking Slovis was supposed to be this Heisman quarterback, why is he not the guy you're going with on Saturday if Jackson's healthy?
He's over the past couple of years, he's had some injuries, and they were to his shoulder, his arm, and then he said last year, like sometimes he looked good, sometimes he just kind of looked off, and it's hard to explain. And they said no, he's not injured, and then you're kind of adding up the injuries, and then they're to his shoulder. Like, I don't know about that. And he mentioned this off season about something about confidence. And he just, if you go back and you look at like what he's doing this year compared to some throws he made his freshman year, like there are throws he's not taking that he took his freshman year, and he hit them. And I'm noticing like a lot of times he's holding the ball pretty long, and then he gets into that situation where he's got to get rid of it, and then he forces a throw.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what he alluded to earlier, where it's like, so the quarterbacks that was the game where they said that quarterbacks look best in the first year. That was, I think, the Jackson Dart game where he just, lit our opponent up. And so it's kind of what we're hoping on, because one of the things I'd be scared of is Keaton Slovis has a few throws every game where you're just like, oh, and there's that Hamilton guy back there. So I can totally see him just sneaking up on him out of nowhere.
Yeah, he's a special guy. Speaking of Jackson Dart, he's obviously the same recruiting class as Tyler Buckner, who's had a lot of success early in the season as well. And I think the thought of a Dart-Buckner 4-year rivalry is kind of cool. These two very highly recruited quarterbacks at these big programs. Steve, USC is 3-3. They've lost all 3 games at home inexplicably to really. Like Utah's all right, but Stanford, you should never lose to them really at home. And then they've won all 3 of the road games. What are you thinking going into this game? Because yes, USC's been bad, but Notre Dame has some unsustainable wins there. Virginia Tech last week, even though we had the post-game win expectancy in our favor, we pulled off a miracle there. We've beaten Toledo a little too close. We've lost to Cincinnati. Notre Dame feels vulnerable. It feels like we are a few series away from a complete meltdown. Are you feeling good, or are you feeling like maybe Notre Dame's going to play up to this game, regardless of whether the opponent is good or bad?
I think it's more of a play-up circumstance. I don't feel like Notre Dame has played their best game of the year by far. They absolutely have not, but they've been slowly getting better. On defense, the defensive side of the football, they've been getting better every single game. Everyone is commenting and remarking upon that. Offensively, there's still a lot to kind of work through, whether it's, again, play calling, QB, or the offensive line. There's kind of that multi-factor analysis that we've been talking about in depth. I think this is going to be a great, coming off a bye week. Both teams are coming off a bye week, but coming off a bye week, preparing for a big rivalry game at home. Hopefully this offensive line can start to be a little bit more cohesive and work together and exploit a team that's had a lot of issues on the ground on defense. And simultaneously, again, you just get a little bit more protection, a little bit more growth from, Jack Cohn, presuming he's the starter. And if you can get him moving his feet and protecting the ball and even just taking sacks for only a yard or 2 yards and rather than, dropping back and making it 3rd and 18, right? I think that if they can just use this 2-week time frame to really polish up all the mistakes, I think in every single game this year, they should be a 14-point, victory at least. They're better than everyone on the schedule. They just haven't played up to it. So I'm going to do that thing that I always do, which is extremely dangerous and hazardous to my health, which is I'm going to have hope that the Notre Dame Fighting Irish are just going to pull it together and just win a goddamn football game. So it hasn't worked out great for me historically to have hope. In fact, I think I'm like 0 for 17 in years where I've had hope. So, but I'm just keeping that train alive. And I think that we are going to show up and be a lot more impressive than what people think that we are.
I like that both teams are on a bye week because there's no excuses then for either team. Notre Dame has historically performed really poorly out of a bye week, but USC will also be on a bye week, so I'm not worried there that somebody's a little fresher than the other. What is annoying is that most schools have a bye week so their players can relax and recover. Notre Dame has a bye week so their kids can do midterms. Like there's no stress-free week ever for these student athletes. Although I don't think that'll be a big factor here. Just looking at SP plus, which is not SNP plus because Bill Connolly gets very mad when you say that, and it is also no longer paywalled, which I don't think he appreciated me saying it was paywalled. So Notre Dame's 17th on this metric and USC is 50th, and probably because of that, the FPI for Power Index has this as a 77% chance Notre Dame victory. I don't think that really surprises anybody, given what we've seen from the two teams. SC is a 3-loss team. Notre Dame is a 1-loss team. Notre Dame still has playoff hopes, so there is something there for USC to beat, to knock Notre Dame out officially, even though I think there's a very low chance we'd get in anyway. There's a lot to play for both teams here. For me, I think the offensive line is going to play better because they played their best game 2 weeks ago against Virginia Tech. I think against USC, they might play up. But like we saw with Virginia Tech, them playing their best still resulted in a, heart stopper of a game. I don't think that's necessarily going to mean they win. But I do feel I'd rather be in Notre Dame's shoes right now, especially where we're at home and USC hasn't really had much luck. And in fact, since 2012, basically, there's been a pattern of Notre Dame USC games. If Notre Dame is good and USC is bad, Notre Dame wins. If Notre Dame is good and USC is good, there's only been one time. That was 2017. That turned out to be, one of my favorite games of all time. That was an utter blowout at Notre Dame Stadium. And then if Notre Dame is mediocre and USC is mediocre, USC tends to win. Those were the two games in the Coliseum there, 14 and 16, where Notre Dame just had abysmal seasons and USC kind of beat them soundly. And I think going into this game, I think Notre Dame is a good team, and I think USC is a mediocre to good team, which does not bode well for SC in recent memory. Plus, playing at Notre Dame Stadium under the lights is going to be a good crowd. But I think about 2019, where USC had no business being on the same field as Notre Dame, and that was a 3-point game, right? They really played Notre Dame well that year. So I see this game going two ways. It's either going to be a 2017 or it's going to be a really close game that can go either way. I know that's a pretty broad range of outcomes there. So I guess, is there anything else you guys want to talk about the game before we give our score predictions, or are we good to kind of move into that?
I did want to point out one misleading stat USC has. They're
okay.
They're ranked 7th in red zone offense. They're 24 out of 25, so 96%. But it's misleading because if you actually look at what they're doing is they got 14 touchdowns and 10 field goals. So if you compare that to like Oklahoma, they're 41 trips. They got 30 touchdowns, 10 field goals. Texas is 25 touchdowns, 6 field goals. So that's one of those areas where USC is not getting it done because they've traded field goals for touchdowns too many times, and they're compared to Oklahoma and Texas, they're getting into the red zone 1 or 2 times less a game.
Yeah,
I was just going to ask if you had an X factor or anything like that.
Well, just as we've kind of hit on a few times here, USC is really inconsistent, and just one number that lines up with that is, I don't know how you even just kind of express this. USC is 3-3. Their closest game by final score was the Stanford game where they lost by 14. That was the closest margin. I don't know how you can be 3-3 and that's your closest score. It just shows you never know what you're going to get with these guys, except for something's going to be. It's disappointing.
All right. So Steve and I have this thing going all year, and it's voodoo. We're so in each other's head that we end up with near identical score predictions, and we don't know what each other's gonna pick. But I'll save that first. I want to hear from you guys, if you're prepared. So Brian, who's gonna win this game, and what's the score?
Let's say Notre Dame. I'd love to predict a close one, like 24-20, but I think it'd be more like 31-20.
Okay. That's the USC guy picking Notre Dame. So that goes to show where they are as a fan base right now. Buck, what do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, my numbers kind of line up with what I see and what I just said about no close games. I'm looking at Notre Dame 35, USC 21, and that 21 could very well be to Brian's point 7 field goals.
Is there do either of you guys give hope for USC to win this game? Like, and if so, how do they win this game?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of good things from USC, but it's always one thing at a time, and it's only one game at a time. So if they somehow magically put it all together in one game, then sure they could do that. But like we said, they're completely inconsistent. And I think, I can't really expect Keaton Slovis to jump a level at this point or go back to his freshman level. So, I mean, I would think probably realistically the best situation for USC winning is they get down by 10 and then Dante Williams says, screw it. Let's throw in Jackson Dart. And he does what he did in that one game he played, where he just is a complete X factor, and Notre Dame isn't prepared for the difference in him versus Slovis.
Are you kind of seeing eye to eye there, Buck, or is there maybe another way in?
I guess if I'm looking for positive things that would point to improvement by USC, you go to the context of their interim coach had never been anything more than a cornerbacks coach before this season. And he's thrust into the head coaching job on a Monday, not even on a Sunday. So I think that the bye week gives them a benefit, not of like advanced strategy kind of stuff, but just really a time to breathe and just get more of his imprint, just to what Brian said earlier about no more screwing around. I think there might have been just a week there of just beating the bad habits out of this team. If you're going to hope, I think that's one thing. And I think, if there is a win, I agree with Brian too, that I think it's a lot easier to see with Jackson Dart playing a role. If you actually looked at that game, it wasn't just Jackson Dart throwing touchdowns. The entire body language of every single team member changed when he was on the field. I mean, the defense came too, and the offensive line improved by a magnitude of whatever. So I think that's the path to victory if there is one.
Yeah,
all right,
Slovis
Steve.
wasn't voted captain.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you guys heard that. Yeah, and so people at the time are like, that's probably not a big deal. That happened to BYU guy, and then now kind of things have progressed. Some people are saying maybe it's because they saw something in Dart versus Slovis.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Steve, I know you're chomping at the bit. Here's your moment to shine. Oh, the 38-20. That's what he's got on the screen.
Have it written down. What do you think?
Do you want to give a rationale first, or do you want to hear?
Sure. So Keaton Slovis, 5 interceptions so far this season through 6 games. Notre Dame has 10 turnovers on defense, and I believe they're like pretty high up in the nation.
Yeah, second in the country at.
Yeah, exactly. So they're this Marcus Freeman defense is the real deal. They have time to prepare. Generally, that's going to benefit the defense. And then, like I said, I think our offensive line is going to be a little bit more surprising, and I think that's going to make this team. I'm thinking for once we're going to see what we saw in the Florida State game, which is probably a little bit tighter in the first half, then blow it open in the third quarter. But I also think that this time we just put them away. I think this defense and this team has matured enough to finally just go up 31-17, and at that point just put the game away, close it down, not let them back in. So that's where I'm getting those numbers from.
Well, that goes to Brian's point too about USC getting crushed in the middle 6, or the middle 6, but the 2 quarters there. You got the middle 8. Steve, this is gonna blow your mind. I have it written here 38-17. You had it 38-20.
Yeah.
We're in such sync. Everything you said, but I'm going to throw Tyler Buckner in there. I think the game is going to be like 10-10 after, a quarter and a half. And I think they're going to do like they always do, which is around the middle of the second quarter, put Buckner in for a few plays. Buckner's going to score a touchdown, and I think Buckner's going to take over the game for a large part, assuming that he's healthy. Do we know the status of his ankle?
He's banged up, but anything official right now it's very hush.
Yeah, so keep an asterisk on that because my prediction there can go sour if he's not playing. But I think the offensive line is going to actually play up this week, and I think Notre Dame is going to kind of run the ball down USC's throat. And look, it's going to be a great atmosphere for sure. I mean, there is still a lot to play for Notre Dame at least. The USC loss especially. What's that?
With Iowa losing, especially, it's like the door keeps getting like creaking open and open like an inch at a time at this point.
Well, we had highlighted last week, right? It's a 2-loss Pac-12 champ and a 2-loss either Big Ten champ or Big 12 champ, which looked Oklahoma could lose at any week now. So like it's not out of the realm of possibility we get in. And like a loss for USC it's an out of conference game, so it's not going to affect anything for getting to that Pac-12 title game. And at this point, you're not competing for playoff spots. So there's more on the line here for Notre Dame, but USC can be a really big spoiler. And I think that's something you got to be aware of. And I wouldn't be surprised if USC wins this game. I have faith, I think, in Notre Dame to pull it off. But again, Steve, whenever we do that, that tends to be when Notre Dame plays some hard
and
stuff.
I'm seeing they're only like 6-point favors. I know that, Brian, you had said you saw 4.5 somewhere around there. So lines are kind of moving. Yeah. But so, I mean, Notre Dame has not really had more than a 1-score game. What was it? Purdue was the only game. And then that was, so I don't know. This very much we could be calling basically a 38-20 game. And then next thing you know, this might be 24-23, right? It's entirely possible the way this season's gone. But I'm putting that hope in my arm and we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, so I think we're on a 4-game winning streak here. So this is pretty big. I think the longest one was 9 years for either team. Maybe it's 11. But this has been a long period of success for Notre Dame, and USC has not beaten them at Notre Dame, I think, since 2011. So it's been a while. One thing I want to go around before we close out, because we've been on for an hour 45, which I love that. I love that when we have guests, we can air it out a little more and go back and forth. So this is for everybody. Steve obviously did the program changes when it gets to you. So I'll start with Brian. List one thing you love, but one thing you hate about Notre Dame. You got to be like, you got to kind of like praise us a bit, and we got to do the same for you. So, this rivalry is about respect, and we'll see what you can muster.
I've been to the Notre Dame game a few times, so I love that. One thing I hate is Shamrock Series uniforms.
I can't blame you. That's a great point. Buck, you've seen it all. Is there something that you like about us secretly? And is there, well, I imagine there's a bunch of things you hate. So what would be one from each? Honestly,
the venue, it's just awesome. And I've not been there, but it just broadcasts so well. It's unique. Like you mentioned about the uniforms, just, hewing to tradition, even the simplicity of the end zone, which is something that you don't really see in a lot of big programs. I mean, some of them try to, make them advertisements for airlines or Subway sandwich setups or whatever. There's a lot to like there. Hate, I try not to hate too much, but honest to God, this guy with the beard that's a mascot, are you serious with this?
Do you find the leprechaun offensive or just silly?
Not offensive. I just kind of wonder, like, how do we get here in our lives where that's what you're doing?
Yeah, I was expecting something like, your fans are so arrogant, you're everywhere, you're delusional, all that normal stuff, you live in history. But that's fair. I do appreciate both of those. Steve, you have to say something nice too here. So that's the caveat.
The Coliseum is elite. That's a great venue, man. And I know it's getting a little bit older, but I mean, it still holds that history there. And they've had a couple of tweaks and facelifts over the course of time, but that's a great venue. And I've been dying to see a game out there. It was on the, part of my plans prior to, COVID, but that obviously knocked it out, but I'll get out there eventually. But yeah, so that's great about USC. What I don't like about them is just you can't have such a great defense and such a great program in the early 2000s when there's just like that California lifestyle as well. You guys just can't be so laid back and just like chill surfer bros and in the middle of LA and then simultaneously just come onto the field and kick the crap out of us. Obviously, you can tell I'm still just bitter about the past. I mean, my hate just purely just comes from they're our rival and we play them every year. They are a cool school though, so I that's why I think I'm starting to hate Michigan a heck of a lot more, to be honest. So, but yeah, I don't know. It's bittersweet with USC. I like I said, it's definitely the game, the rivalry game I like to see the most every year.
Yeah, Buck, to your point, if you have the chance to go to Notre Dame, you absolutely should. Like I went for the Michigan game in 2012, which was a night game, and I was around Michigan fans who were blown away by their experience.
Really?
Like being at the grotto, even like where they do the prayer with the candles, doing the walk to the stadium, the bookstore, just seeing it. South Bend is kind of gross, but like the actual campus is one of the nicest places I've ever seen. It's truly special. And I like going to SC is on my like wish list as well. But I think Notre Dame is a stadium every college football fan owes it to themselves to kind of to just kind of take that in, because there is something really unique there. Like I imagine it is at SC as well. For me, the thing that I don't like about USC, and I think this is West Coast fans in general, but I think there's a fair weatherness that we wish you would carry your weight more. Like Notre Dame fans will always go to games. We will always sell out. We're everywhere. When SC isn't good, like you're the only two SC guys I see on Twitter. And I know there's a lot of you, but I don't see it. It's not that loud. Tickets for the Coliseum are usually pretty cheap, and like Notre Dame fans make up like 20% of the stadium. You know, I would just wish USC's would be a more like hardcore fan base, like some of the Midwestern schools. That's my hate for SC. My thing I love about SC is it's the history. It's I find the Trojan coming out is really cool. I like the V, you know, I like the Coliseum. I think SC's got some great marching band tunes as well. Like it is that history there that Notre Dame fans really respect, as much as they would hate to admit it. So I would say I respect that a lot, and I like that about SC. Is there anything else you guys want to chat about before we go? Because I do have two jokes to end on.
Oh gosh. Please tell me one's about Clay
So
Helton.
Yeah. No, they're not my jokes.
Okay.
Just so we don't get in trouble, we should mention Chris Peterson as an option. I think if there's any USC fans watching this and they don't hear that name pop up, they'll get a little mad.
Fair enough. Steve, are you content with what has been said?
No, I'm good. Everything's ready to go. Let it rip.
I got two SC jokes. One was from an online poster from a UCLA fan, so I took it and like made it a Notre Dame bit. So the first one is, the luck of the Irish is good forever, but a Trojan is only good once.
Oh boy. Okay. Wow.
And the other one's a Lou Holtz joke from a pep rally a couple years ago, and he said, "Do you know why students go to USC? Because it's easier to spell than UCLA." And that got the crowd going. That was 2017, actually. So that's it for me. I think that's it for the Four Horsemen podcast. Thanks for listening. Big thanks to our SC guys for coming on, being great sports. I'm so excited for this game, and I'm glad to hear the chirps afterwards if you guys win. And if we win, we won't be too bad. We'll be respectful. So yeah, I think with that said, just go Irish.